and welcome to Fox 29's News Now on this Tuesday morning. We're going to get started with some local news for you near 30th Street Station, where traffic is a mess after a police chase and subsequent crash. The driver is still on the run this morning. Fox 29's Lauren Johnson filed this report.
Yeah, it's really bad. So I've seen the phones come out where people are trying to take the pictures of the car. I've also seen the hands flailing, and then I've heard the horns honking. All of it happening because of this car that you see here, and it's been here since we arrived here this morning shortly after 4 o'clock. We're understanding that this car was involved in some kind of chase. Not sure if they were being chased by police from University of Pennsylvania or Philadelphia police. Unsure of the lead agency as of now, but we do know that someone in that car police wanted to talk to about dropping off a gunshot victim at a local hospital. But that person obviously didn't want to talk to police, bailed, and then crashed here at the intersection of Market Street, Schuylkill Avenue, jumped out of the car, and we understand may possibly have thrown something into the river before taking off down the Schuylkill Trail. That was earlier. There was a large police presence here earlier. We could see officers on bikes and on foot searching for that suspect. Since then, it has become more of a traffic headache. Now, usually on these kinds of scenes, my photographer Chris and I were talking about the cars are usually towed pretty quickly. This one's been here since we got here at 4 a.m. So not easy to get around in an area that already has a lot of construction. So people are losing their patience and a lot of horns are honking.
And more in local news this morning. Smiley faces are making some people angry in Delaware County. Police are searching for a vandal with an interesting sense of humor. Fox 29's Bill Anderson has the story.
Guys, I've been trying to figure out all morning, at what point do you earn a name? You're 12, 13, 14. They're calling you the smiley face bandit. Not sure that this child had this in mind when they went on this vandalism spree, but that's the case here at Springfield Township, Delaware County. Let's take a look at the video, what they've been doing. For the last week, people in and around the Rolling Green apartments on North State Road, they found blue smiling faces, the word nope, and other things, nobody knows what that means, on their cars and their houses. Now, initially, neighbors say they were just annoyed by it. But as they started seeing the bills for the paint removal, they got angry, and now the police are involved. Now, here's the thing. Residents believe that they've seen this, in quotes, bandit, and he's allegedly a kid, 12 to 14 years old. He's riding his bike around the neighborhood. He's got the same color paint on his bike. Some say he's coming back to see his artwork, and that has residents wanting to take matters into their own hands.
I want him to know that we are watching and we are going to get you. We are going to get him. He better not come around again because I'm out there.
If I could get him, I'd like to get his parents and see where he lives and run it by them. You know, grab him by the neck, so to speak, the old-fashioned way. But these days, with being politically correct, you can't do that.
No, you can't do that, but that's also part of the reason why police want to put an end to this quickly. Residents are getting upset, hundreds of dollars of damage. They hope that this smiley face bandit or kid knocks it off quickly. The police are now paying attention.
And more in local news this morning. Police say it's a miracle a teen is alive after a shooting in Kensington that was captured on video. Let's take a look. You can see the gunman wearing a white t-shirt and blue hat hiding between cars waiting on the teen. It happened on August 4th, just after 9 p.m. on the 1800 block of Venango Street. That's when the shooter ambushes the teen, firing 13 shots, striking him in the chest, arm, and leg.
This cold callous attack. I mean, they fired 13 times from point blank range. And it's a miracle that the complainant is still with us to this day. And again, like I said, we do need the community's help. We really do. I mean, if you can just call in and point us in the direction. We're not asking the people to come in and get personally involved, but just give enough information to put us in the right direction, and we'll take it from there.
The teen remains in critical condition at Temple University Hospital. If you think you recognize the shooter, police want to hear from you. And happening today, hearings will continue on a proposed safe injection site in Kensington. On Monday, supporters put photos of victims who lost their lives to opioids outside the federal courthouse. Inside, a judge heard arguments on whether the city should become the nation's first to open a supervised consumption site. Today, the judge will listen to how the proposed site would operate amid opposition from some neighbors. Supporters say it will help prevent overdose deaths and human trafficking.
Our addicts in Kensington get beat, raped, sold. It's human trafficking. It's horrible down there. And they literally die on a corner, on a curb, and there's no reason for it.
Philadelphia's U.S. attorney is against the site, arguing that it normalizes drug use and violates federal law. Also happening today, the advisory group for Philadelphia Energy Solutions will hold another public meeting. The group's goal is to get the community input on the impending closure of the refinery that was the site of a massive fire and explosion in June. They will meet today, tomorrow, and August 27th, which is next Tuesday, and September 9th. All of the meetings will be held at Preparatory Charter School on Point Breeze Avenue. And in Chester County this morning, police are asking for your help identifying these two men who they say are behind a pair of home invasion robberies. Westchester police say they struck on Friday and again on Saturday. Police say both men had guns when they robbed the homes. And take a good look at this guy spotted on surveillance video in Philadelphia's East Germantown neighborhood. Police say he robbed the Rite Aid on the 6200 block of Germantown Ave on Saturday. Police say he took several things without paying, and when a store employee confronted him, he pulled out a gun. The man got away in a burgundy Nissan sedan. If you think you recognize him, you are urged to contact police. And in Cape May County, peacocks are roaming around one town, and no, they didn't escape from the zoo. The family, or pride, of peacocks have been seen roaming around Route 47 in Dennis Township. Neighbors have complained to the township, saying the birds are too noisy and quite messy. We talked to their owner, who says they wandered away and he's having a hard time capturing them because people keep feeding them. On top of not feeding them, the township is asking drivers not to get out of their cars to take photos of the peacocks. In other news this morning, the Philadelphia International Airport celebrated National Aviation Day yesterday by hosting members of the famed Tuskegee Airmen Philadelphia chapter. One of those airmen was Congressional Gold Medal recipient Dr. Eugene Richardson. The 93-year-old talked about how their service helped end segregation in the military.
At the beginning of World War II, our military was rigidly segregated by race. But President Truman saw how well men of color did in the military. They figured it was stupid to have segregation.
Dr. Richardson said it was And moving on to your Fox 29 weather authority. The Philadelphia area is slated for another hot and humid day on this Tuesday as a heat advisory remains in effect through 8 p.m. tomorrow. Again, we're looking at temperatures in the low 90s today, but with humidity, the real feel will be closer to 100 degrees. Here we have a look at current temperatures in our area. An enviable 75 degrees up in the Poconos, already 82 degrees over in Lancaster, 84 degrees currently here in the city of Philadelphia, and varying degrees in the 80s for down the shore, 82 degrees in Wildwood, and 85 in Atlantic City. Looking ahead to your 7-day forecast, again, it's going to be hot and humid this Tuesday. Some afternoon thunderstorms are expected. not unlike yesterday. And some afternoon thunderstorms are expected to continue at least until Thursday, unfortunately, before we dry out finally for what appears to be a pretty pleasant weekend with temperatures in the 80s. We'll finally be feeling some relief there and a mix of clouds and sunshine. And don't forget to download the latest version of the Fox 49 Daily app to have the latest forecast right at your fingertips. And we are going to take you over now to New York, where the state's attorney general is making an announcement on President Donald Trump's public charge rule, which would affect immigrants who have green cards if those immigrants currently accept any sort of public benefits like food stamps. Stay with us.
We understand that this country is really all about equality for all individuals and equal opportunities for all individuals. And so for more than 130 years, the courts and Congress and the Constitution have applied the public charge determinations that be applied only to individuals primarily dependent on the government for support over the long term. And we intend to uphold that standard by expanding the public charge definition far beyond its historical and statutory boundaries. This new rule would effectively exclude from entry into the United States millions of black and brown low-income immigrants, many of whom are on their way to build stable and more prosperous lives, and many who will be elected officials in the state of New York. America is a nation of immigrants. It was built by immigrants, and generations have landed on the welcoming shores of Ellis Island with nothing more than a dream in their pockets. Their dreams and hard work have built the strongest, most prosperous, and most vibrant, diverse, and inclusive democracies in the history of the world. And all through the generations, our core values of inclusivity and diversity have withstood historic challenges. Make no mistake, we are in the midst of another great challenge, and the Trump administration's thinly veiled efforts to only allow those who meet their narrow ethnic, racial, and economic criteria to enter is a clear violation of the laws and will be met with a very, very strong response. Quite simply, as this rule, more children will go hungry. More families will go without medical care.
And we apologize for the technical difficulties. While the audio issue gets sorted out, we're going to turn you over to Vice President Mike Pence, who is at the National Space Council meeting in Virginia. Stay with us.
Moment without your leadership and your support. Later this morning, we're going to hear more about our administration's progress toward a new unified defense agreement to defend America's national security space assets and also ensure our collective defense. But for all that we've accomplished, the greatest triumphs of American leadership in space still lie ahead, and you'll hear about those plans today. The National Space Council today will send new policy recommendations to the President that will help drive even greater cooperation between our government, our commercial partners, and like-minded nations across the world, nations that share our values of democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. We will build on the success of the International Space Station by working with our friends and allies to support a moon landing in 2024, to develop sustainable long-term lunar surface operations, and to build the spacecraft that will carry us to Mars. We'll also continue to unleash the creative powers of America's commercial space enterprise. This Council will recommend today steps that will encourage innovation and ensure that American companies have the level playing field they need to compete and win in space. And we'll continue to transform NASA into a leaner, more accountable, and more agile organization. Isn't that right, Jim? Yes, sir. Good. We're going to make it easier than ever to recruit and retain the world's brightest scientists, engineers, and managers, and we're going to hit our goals, and we're going to make new American history in space. You know, President Trump tasked the National Space Council with reigniting and reinvigorating the American space program, and I'm humbled and proud at the same time to say that's exactly what this team has done. And that's what we're going to continue to do with the support of so many of you gathered here today. As President Trump said, in his words, it is America's destiny to be the leader amongst nations on our adventure into the great unknown. And that's why the National Space Council was reconstituted, and that's what brought us here today. And while the tasks before us involve hardship and hazard, sacrifice and perseverance, we know what the men and women of Apollo 11 knew 50 years ago, and that is simply this, that Americans can accomplish anything we set our minds to, and America will lead the world back into the vast expanse of space. So thank you all for being here today. We're grateful to the members of the National Space Council, our advisory group, all the experts and industry leaders who are joining us here today. And I look very much forward to our dialogue and our discussion and the support that I see in this room, the support that I hear from not only people involved in the great space enterprise across this country, but from everyday Americans from every walk of life convinces me that we have only just begun to renew American leadership in space. So thank you all. Thank you all for your support. Thank you for your presence here today. Let's get to work. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your kind attention. We're going to get right down to business. We are joined today here at the Udvar Hazy Center. And let's give the Smithsonian another round of applause, will you? This is a spectacular place that fires the imagination of Americans every day. In addition to all the members of the National Space Council, we're joined by a number of distinguished guests in the audience, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being with us today. It's hard for me to look around this room and not recognize virtually everyone in every seat, and yet this is just a small sampling, isn't it, Jim, of the incredible leadership of America's public and private space enterprise. So give yourselves a round of applause. We are grateful that you're here. Today's meeting of the National Space Council will provide updates from our council members on ongoing work to help secure American leadership in space. We're going to hear from scientists and industry leaders about innovations that will drive the next era of human space exploration. We're going to discuss a new set of recommendations, as I mentioned in my formal remarks. To begin with, I'd like to ask Dr. Mary Lynn Dittmar, who's President and CEO of the Coalition for Deep Space Exploration, to bring us some updates on our user advisory group's activities since their last meeting in March. Mary Lynn, we appreciate your leadership, your extraordinary career. Thank you for bringing your experience to this, and Join me in thanking all the members of the User Advisory Group, many of which are here on the front row, for their contributions to the National Space Council. Thank you all. Would you all mind standing up? User Advisory Group members, take a bow. Great job. Dr. Dittmar, quick report on the User Advisory Group.
Mr. Vice President and distinguished members of the National Space Council, thank you for inviting me to provide an update on the activities of the Users Advisory Group. As you all know, the objectives, scope of activities, and description of duties of the UAG is defined in statute, executive order, and the charter of the National Space Council Users Advisory Group, dated December 6, 2017, signed by the acting NASA administrator. While the UAG is administratively chartered and supported under NASA, the UAG functions exclusively in an independent advisory capacity to the National Space Council, reporting to you through the National Space Council Executive Secretary. Mr. Vice President, you have repeatedly challenged the UAG to function as a think tank for the National Space Council, in addition to the advisory role spelled out in its title. It is intended to be a conduit for new ideas. It also offers sometimes differing but hopefully constructive commentary on conventional wisdom, which, we often note, is sometimes too conventional and not nearly wise enough. Organizationally, the UAG is divided into 6 subcommittees that reflect precisely the priorities that you and our chairman, retired Admiral James Ellis, discussed prior to its formation. In the months since our meeting with you in Huntsville in March, we've gathered to review and scope the specific taskings that you gave us earlier this year. The Exploration and Discovery Subcommittee, led by retired General Lester Lyles, is structuring a one-time review of NASA's newly named Artemis program, focusing on its architecture, technical planning, organizational structure, and leadership. The fact that General Lyles also capably chairs the NASA Advisory Council will ensure that the UAG draws on the work of that NASA committee while offering independent advice to you where appropriate. As you know, Admiral Ellis is chairman of the National Security Subcommittee and leads a very capable group with the required security clearances. Their focus, also reflective of National Space Council interest, has been on the organizational structure and functionality of the emerging Space Force. As part of their review, last month, they received a high-level classified briefing from the Department of Defense and the intelligence community on the process and progress of implementation planning in anticipation of pending congressional action. I and my colleague Eric Stallmer, president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, co-chair the Economic Development and Industrial Base Subcommittee. As you directed, we are first assessing how best to manage space-related spectrum issues, including both process and content in this critical area. We are also considering additional recommendations for regulatory process reform and partnerships to move beyond NASA in accelerating the economic development of low Earth orbit and beyond. Retired Colonel, veteran astronaut, and Space Shuttle pilot and mission commander Pam Melroy leads the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee. The committee is focused on assessing the status of the NASA Space Exploration Technology Roadmap, specifying space technologies to be explored, alternatives to be compared, and timelines that must be met. The results of that review will determine whether additional support to the subcommittee from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine is required. Retired Colonel Eileen Collins, renowned Space Shuttle pilot and mission commander, chairs the UAG Subcommittee on Outreach and Education. I will say more about outreach efforts in a minute. On the education and training side, her committee is committed to developing actionable recommendations to enhance space-related and engineering education at all levels. She has innovatively begun to draw on speakers on STEM from the National Committee of State Legislators and from universities with NASA involvement to gain a broader perspective on education and workforce issues. The final group, the Space Policy and International Engagement Subcommittee, is led by Dr. David Wolf, astronaut, spacewalker, medical doctor, electrical engineer, and your fellow Hoosier. The committee's broad remit will include review of both the current and evolving national space policy, as well as the guidelines, behavioral norms, and technical standards affecting international space cooperation and deconfliction. We have followed the successful outcome of the 62nd session of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and have planned a session with the Department of State to ensure that we understand the administration's space goals and objectives in the diplomatic arena. Separately, as the Users Advisory Group to the National Space Council enters its second year, we are reviewing the organizational charter for potential updating so as to better define the organizational structure, required resources, and to streamline work processes. We believe and know from discussions with you that you agree that an ongoing and active role of the UAG is important to the success of the administration's effort to marshal a whole-of-government strategy to U.S. space. Finally, as I noted earlier, mindful that we were impaneled to represent all users of space, members of the Users Advisory Group have participated in major domestic and international space events over the last several months, many of them in conjunction with a wonderful nationwide celebration of the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, which referenced earlier. We will continue to serve as the eyes and ears of your National Space Council, seeking input and ideas, issues and innovations, scientists and engineers, students and teachers, experienced aerospace veterans at all levels, and importantly, the up-and-coming new generation of space professionals. Mr. Vice President, on behalf of the Users Advisory Group and its chairman, Admiral Ellis, thank you for this update opportunity. Wherever we go, at home or abroad, and with whomever we speak, we see a new energy, a new vitality in the space community. We appreciate the focus that you and the National Space Council have brought to our nation's role in space, and we look forward to continuing to support your efforts and to our shared contribution to the future of the nation's space enterprise. I'll be pleased to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Dr. Dittmar. And I don't see him through the bright lights, but Admiral Jim Ellis is the chairman of the User Advisory Group. I don't know if he's with us today, but you can give him a big round of applause as well. He's, you can tell from that report the great work that the Admiral and the whole team are doing. Questions of the panel of the User Advisory Group, anything having to do with the committees, the reports that were made? Will give us an opportunity. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dittmar. Thank you, and thanks to all the members of the User Advisory Group for outstanding work. Now we're going to move to some reports by members of the National Space Council, I'm going to recognize our Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, who has been involved in working on space traffic management, regulatory reform, and is almost as excited about American innovation in space as the President and me. So join me in thanking the Secretary of Commerce for his great leadership.
Thank you, Vice President Pence, for the opportunity to update the National Space Council on space activities at the Department of Commerce. Last year, there were 114 government and private space launches worldwide, the first time in 3 decades that number exceeded 100. U.S. had 31 launches, including a record number of commercial launches, but China had 39. More than 80 countries have now entered the space industry, often playing under different rules from what we have. These countries realize that space is a strategic industry that creates a highly technical workforce with spin-off technologies and economic growth. This was evident at the Paris Air Show, which highlighted U.S. leadership but also made clear the substantial efforts of foreign government-backed entities to surpass us. 75% of space industry revenues are now commercial. We intend to keep the United States as the flag of choice as the global space industry moves from $415 billion of revenues to $1 trillion within the next 20 years. Commerce Department is actively pursuing the space traffic management goals outlined in Space Policy Directive 3. Our strong partnership with the Department of Defense will modernize space situational awareness capabilities. Mark Daly, a senior executive with experience in both defense and space commerce, leads the Commerce Department's SSA landing team at the 18th Space Control Squadron at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Our joint SSA efforts will help avoid the destructive impact of space debris, even as space activities grow more complex and global in nature. In response to our April 2019 RFI, more than 50 academic and industry partners submitted creative ideas to limit the creation of new space debris through satellite design, improved SSA, and early mission deorbit. The Commerce Department's role is critically important given the plans of commercial industry to launch thousands of mass-produced satellites in constellations. Commerce is developing an open architecture data repository for space debris information. This will allow us to provide conjunction notifications to the U.S. and global commercial space industries in the near future. The new repository will incorporate private sector innovations to track and avoid space debris, and that in turn will facilitate new commercial space services. Under Space Policy Directive 2, to eliminate or streamline regulations, we are revising remote sensing and export control rules. We have received extensive feedback from U.S. companies in the fast-developing and extremely competitive global market for remote sensing. Our immediate goal is a new draft rule that encourages domestic innovation while ensuring global competitiveness and market leadership of American companies. Commerce is working with the State Department and other agencies to review public comments on our March proposed rule so that we can issue a final rule this fall. At an industry day I hosted in April, we discussed the need to maintain export controls with some countries while streamlining them for others. Within the Commerce Department, we have reestablished the Office of Space Commerce that had been dormant for decades. It is the only U.S. government entity charged with pursuing the unique interests of the commercial space industry. The commercial industry has said repeatedly that it needs an advocate, a one-stop shop in its dealings with both U.S. government and foreign governments. So we continue to work within the administration and with Congress to establish a Bureau of Space Commerce that will give Commerce the resources needed to execute the Space Council's directives. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I look forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. You can give the Secretary of Commerce a round of applause. That is an extraordinary amount of work. Wilbur, thank you. Thank you so much for your tremendous efforts, and I want to offer my congratulations. You mentioned the work in April, but the Space Enterprise Summit that the Department of Commerce co-hosted in June, I think you've also spoken about, and I hope that our private industry partners see the tremendous commitment by the President in our Department of Commerce to enlivening private investment and development. I'll ask members of the panel to throw a question at the Secretary, but a quick question. The new commercial remote sensing regulations are being developed at Commerce. Can you speak about when those will be completed or amplify the points you made?
Yes, we think by the end of October we should have that work completed.
Okay, outstanding. Any other questions from members of the panel for the Secretary of Commerce? Okay, we're very grateful, Wilbur. Thank you so very much, and all of your remarks will be included in the record as prepared. Next, I'd like to recognize the administrator of NASA, Jim Bridenstine, who has become a great friend of mine. He is a great champion for American leadership in space. He was given a charge by the President of the United States to return Americans to the moon by 2024 and make sure the first astronauts on Mars are Americans. And Jim, I know I speak on behalf of the President when I appreciate the energy you've brought to this effort. We should not be terribly surprised that a Navy F-18 pilot was ready to move out and move out quickly. But join me in thanking the administrator of NASA for his tremendous efforts. And Jim, look forward to your report to the Space Conference.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice President. It is an honor to serve in this position. Just yesterday, I was at the White House briefing members of the National Security Council on our plans to go to the moon and on to Mars. And while I was there, Victoria Coates brought in a box of M&Ms. And I said, and by the way, these aren't just M&Ms, these are President Trump M&Ms, not just any M&Ms here. And I said, now, what is that all about? And she said, M&M, moon and Mars. And so she said, make sure you show this to everybody and let them know we're going to the moon because we are going to Mars. And the President has been very clear. We will put an American flag on Mars. So, Mr. Vice President, you can have the M&Ms. A couple of things that I think are important to note. Sir, since you I guess, importantly gave us that charge back in March, a number of things have changed. And I'll just kind of go through one at a time. As you mentioned earlier today, low Earth orbit. That is a great opportunity for us to figure out how to do things commercially. We have commercial crew on the brink of being ready. We have commercial resupply, already resupplying the International Space Station. And recently we announced that we have some objectives to achieve a more commercial nature in low Earth orbit, starting with creating both the demand side and the supply side. So on the demand side, we're looking at really two lines of effort that we believe could have major breakthroughs for basically activities in low Earth orbit, starting with industrialized biomedicine and then advanced materials. Those two lines of effort, if we can do experiment after experiment, iterating one after another, I believe in the next 3 to 7 years we can have a strong breakthrough that will result in demand for access to low Earth orbit. Now that's going to take an effort and a change of philosophy on how we utilize the International Space Station. It is also true, Mr. Vice President, that just a few short months ago we announced that we're doing things to increase supply of activities in low Earth orbit. We are going to make available commercial crew seats for industry so that they can take space, whether it's researchers or manufacturers or even tourists, to the International Space Station. We also want to make the International Space Station itself available for more people, so we're looking at additional habitation using the port for commercial operations on the International Space Station. And each of these activities will increase supply, while at the same time working really hard to generate demand with an eventual effort. And of course, we've got procurements underway that we are interested in seeing what industry can provide, but we want to have free flyers in low Earth orbit that are commercial in nature. So these are things that we are striving to in low Earth orbit. But remember why we are commercializing, and I think this is important for everybody on the National Space Council. Why are we commercializing? Because we want to use the resources that the taxpayers give to us to go to the moon, following Space Policy Directive 1, to go sustainably, to go with commercial partners and international partners, to utilize the resources on the moon, the water ice, Mr. Vice President, that you talked about on the South Pole. Use that as life support. How do we live for months on another planetary body so that ultimately we can take all of that knowledge onto Mars? So what we do in low Earth orbit matters because we want to go to the moon and onto Mars. And interestingly, just last week, I was at the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans. And I know, Mr. Vice President, you have been keenly focused on the SLS rocket. And I will tell you what I saw there was eye-watering. We say the words that it's 4/5 complete. I would say that it's well over 90% complete at this point. The engine section was the long pole in the tent. It was on the critical path. We removed the engine section from the critical path. We integrated the rest of the rocket horizontally. It is a beautiful thing to see in the horizontal, and this week and next week we will be integrating the engine section into the rest of the rocket, and by the end of this year, as you correctly said earlier, we're going to move that rocket out of the factory and we're going to test it. And I will tell you, yes. So it was exciting to see that, and I will tell you, Mr. Vice President, not just the first SLS, but the hardware for the second SLS is already being put into place and will start to be assembled very soon as well. So very exciting times down at the Michoud Assembly Facility. And as you were there just last month, Mr. Vice President, when you announced the Orion crew capsule complete with the European service module, we are very close to shipping that up to Plumbrook Station, where it will be tested, thermal vacuum testing as well as EMI testing. So all of those very exciting activities are underway. We also, since the last National Space Council, we have gone under contract for the first element of the Gateway, the power and propulsion element, solar electric propulsion for that reusable command module in orbit around the moon for the next 15 years. So that's a great development as well. And by the way, the reason that was able to go so fast, Mr. Vice President, is because of the charge to be ready by 2024 to land not just the next man, but also the first woman on the south pole of the moon. That charge is really what changed the dynamic to make that go so fast, that acquisition element. On that Gateway, we're moving as fast as we can, rapid acquisition of what we call a mini-hab, just a small habitation module attached to the power and propulsion element. That's not the long-term solution, but that's what's going to help us get our astronauts from the Orion into a lander and land on the surface of the moon. Last week we announced that lander that I'm talking about is going to be managed out of the Marshall Space Flight Center. And it is absolutely true, Mr. Vice President, the Johnson Space Center is going to be very involved in that. Certainly when it comes to environmental control and life support systems, there is no place on the planet better than the Johnson Space Center. When it comes to human-to-machine interface, no place better than Johnson as well. And of course, when it comes to mission planning in the astronaut office, a lot of capability both at Marshall and at Johnson to get this national project underway. And as you are aware, Mr. Vice President, in the last months since the March National Space Council, we also named the program Artemis. And I think that is a significant milestone. It was you who wrote the speech yourself, and I was there when you did it, and you said, we're going to put the first woman on the moon. And I will tell you that has energized so many people, my daughter included, who is 11 years old. She claims she wants to be a teacher right now, but she is certainly excited about landing a woman on the moon. And I like to say it's 50 years ago we had Apollo, and it just so happens that in Greek mythology, Apollo had a twin sister. Her name was Artemis. She was the goddess of the moon, and this time when we go to the moon, we go with a very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women, and it is long overdue. So we are very excited about that. And then lastly, I think it's important to remember the moon to Mars. When we think about what we're doing next, the reason the Gateway is so important is that it is absolutely a gateway to the surface of the moon, and we want to do long durations on the surface of the moon using the Gateway. It is also evolvable. It is an opportunity for us to take humans deeper into space than we've ever gone before in human history, and in fact, that is our ship to get to Mars. And by the way, if we have the right investments today with advanced propulsion, I know we're going to hear maybe a little bit about nuclear thermal propulsion, about advanced propulsion and the ability to do entry, descent, and landing with 20 metric ton payloads into the Martian atmosphere and onto the Martian surface. These are investments that are not much more than what we're already spending, and we can put together a really robust Mars plan in keeping with the direction to put an American flag on Mars. So, Mr. Vice President, things have changed since March, and we are moving rapidly under your direction and the direction of President Trump. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks for that great report, and mostly thanks for your energetic and enthusiastic leadership of the President's vision for space. And I'm going to take this box of M&Ms back to the President right after you sign it. He'll know even better today that you got the message. It's M&M. That's worth remembering. Dr. Calvin Drogemeyer is the Director of the Office of Science and Technology. The Administrator just mentioned our efforts to update the approval process for launching space nuclear power sources, and Dr. Drogemeyer has a report for us on that. Give us some words on progress. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you today. As we embark on that new generation of space missions that you so eloquently described in your remarks, and as Administrator Bridenstine has said, this time we go to stay. And the challenge here is achieving a persistent human presence in space and on other worlds, that is, staying there, will require the development and application of a wide range of advanced technologies, including lightweight and long-lasting energy sources that can support human life and exploration activities in the most austere and inhospitable environments. Now, over many decades, as we will hear from Mr. Jeviden of BWX, NASA has relied on space nuclear systems on the Moon, on Mars, and in the outer solar system, and also for other missions where alternative power sources have been inadequate. Some of these environments are far too dark for solar power, or they're too far away to carry sufficient supplies of chemical fuels. In the dawning new era of American space exploration, we just heard about exploration into deep space, nuclear power sources will remain critical to the fullest realization of our scientific and exploration objectives. Now, for modest power needs, radioisotopic thermal generators, which are essentially nuclear batteries, can use the energy of radioactive decay to generate electricity for even decades. But for higher power needs, small nuclear reactors can provide the heating, electricity, and also spacecraft propulsion needs. So as we look forward and we also look outward, we must ensure that America can safely develop nuclear space systems that enhance our ability for space exploration, our operational capabilities, and also the potential for increased commercial space activities, as Administrator Bridenstine just mentioned. Now, over a year ago, OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, began reviewing existing nuclear space launch policy. And as I reported at this Council's March meeting in Huntsville, that OSTP review led to the creation of an interagency working group co-chaired by OSTP and our colleagues at the National Space Council. Now, that working group's mandate was to develop recommendations for the Space Council to establish updated and risk-informed processes for launching space nuclear systems that are funded or licensed by the federal government. Now, our primary objective here is to ensure that rigorous and effective nuclear safety analysis and review are conducted prior to the launch of any space nuclear system. And in doing that, we want to leverage past experience wherever we can. And to that end, we must provide clear guidelines to help mission planners and launch approval authorities ensure that launch safety is maintained. We also want to ensure a positive response, a positive safety analysis and launch authorization process that is forward-looking. We think about the future that allows the federal government, as we just heard, the private sector, to effectively use space nuclear systems as we return to the Moon and we venture far beyond. And finally, we seek to strengthen the existing process for launching space nuclear systems in ways that will better ensure rigorous, risk-informed safety assessment without excessive redundancy or wasted time and cost. So at the Council's urging, since last March, we have continued these review activities, Mr. Vice President. In close cooperation with the National Security Council, we have now finalized a set of recommendations that we believe meet the objectives I just outlined. We ask the Council approve these recommendations for updating the existing process for the launch of spacecraft containing space nuclear systems. And in closing, I'd like to reiterate a point I made at our last meeting, and namely that ensuring a rigorous launch safety process is essential to using space nuclear systems. But we can't stop there. We must not stop there. Moving forward, we must also focus on ensuring that we sustain the skills here in America and that we also develop the technologies needed to provide space nuclear systems that are ready to propel as well as power future American spacecraft. I look forward to working with all of you in implementing this and other policy initiatives that will be necessary for sustaining and strengthening American leadership in space. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for your leadership and for your support. Thank you, sir.
We're going to move on to national security issues in a moment. I'm going to ask other members of the panel to submit your reports in writing. With one exception, Stephen Bradbury is the General Counsel of the Department of Transportation, and the President and I couldn't be more grateful to Secretary Elaine Chao for the energetic efforts that DOT has made to update regulations regarding space launch, and with our commitment to invigorating and continuing to see the private space enterprise develop, I wanted to recognize Stephen Bradbury for a quick update on Department of Transportation's activities. Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, members of the Space Council, and distinguished guests. On behalf of Secretary Chao, I'm pleased to update the Council on the Department of Transportation's efforts to streamline the licensing of commercial space launches and reentries, and on DOT's activities regarding satellite-based navigation. First, on April 15th of this year, in accordance with the President's Space Policy Directive 2, the Department of Transportation, through the FAA, published a notice of proposed rulemaking for a major streamlining of FAA's commercial space launch and reentry regulations. This proposal represents a great deal of work by many people at the FAA and in the Office of the Secretary, and it was produced in near record time. It was developed with input from experts in the FAA, the commercial space industry, and other departments and agencies across the federal government. Consistent with the President's instructions, the proposed rule would replace outdated prescriptive requirements with more flexible performance-based criteria. It would allow us to license different types of commercial space operations and vehicles through a single streamlined set of procedures, and it would dramatically reduce the size and complexity of the FAA's commercial space licensing regulations. Now, DOT has received substantive comments on the proposed rule from dozens of companies, organizations, and individuals, including 15 submissions asking more than 100 clarifying questions, which the FAA has endeavored to address in the public rulemaking record. It's obvious the proposed rule has generated a lot of interest and a lot of questions. To allow for greater input, the Department extended the public comment period to 126 days, and it just closed yesterday, August 19th. Also, in response to industry requests for face-to-face input, the FAA held a series of meetings with individual commercial space operators and their representatives. FAA honored all requests and met with representatives from Blue Origin, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, United Launch Alliance, and the Coalition for Deep Space Exploration. DOT published a synopsis of these sessions in the public docket. The FAA is digesting the comments and information we've received and will be hard at work over the coming months to address concerns and consider potential revisions to improve the final rule. We're committed to achieving a licensing framework that enables flexibility and innovation in operations, including, where appropriate, by relying on advisory circulars and on methods of compliance developed by operators in lieu of prescriptive rules. Our goal is to publish a final rule by early fall of next year. We're confident this rulemaking will bolster America's industrial base and leadership in the commercial space sector through a smarter, more efficient licensing process, one that lowers the burden and costs of regulatory compliance while ensuring protection of life, property, and national security. Now let me turn briefly to satellite-based navigation. Under National Security Presidential Directive 39, issued in December 2004, the United States is committed to developing, maintaining, and modernizing the Global Positioning System, or GPS, and other satellite-based navigation systems, including backup capabilities in the event of a disruption of GPS. A recent study funded by the Department of Commerce found that GPS has enabled more than $1.4 trillion in economic benefits since 1983 and that a 30-day loss of GPS could cause $30 billion in economic harm and have serious safety of life implications. NSPD 39 gives DOT lead responsibility over the full range of civil uses of GPS, and along with DOD, it makes DOT co-chair of the National Space-Based Positioning, Navigation, and Timing Executive Committee. Through this PNT-XCOM, we're working closely with DHS and other federal departments and agencies to address policy and technical issues, including the security and resilience of GPS receivers. In light of the critical importance of GPS, DOT has asked for submissions from technology vendors interested in providing GPS backup technologies, and we're now organizing field demonstrations of those technologies. Another way to protect GPS service is real-time monitoring of satellite signals to ensure they meet the necessary performance standards, and we're providing funding to the Air Force to support that monitoring. And working closely with the Commerce Department's NTIA and the FCC, DOT conducted a GPS-adjacent band study to measure levels of tolerance and interference from adjacent band radio frequency systems. The study results show that we need strong, consistent policies to ensure RF protection for satellite-based navigation. Let me close by emphasizing that for the Secretary and all of us at the Department of Transportation, our participation in supporting the objectives of the National Space Council is among our highest priorities. By coordinating the efforts of all the members of the Space Council, we can achieve tremendous benefits for the American people and our national economy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Great report, Steve. Give the Secretary our best. Okay? Great. And I can attest to the Secretary's enthusiasm, and we're very, very grateful for the efforts. One last tap before we go to national security. We actually asked the Deputy Secretary of Energy, Dan Brouillette, to be here. The Department of Energy is actually not a part of the National Space Council, but it's just doing so much important work in this space. We wanted Secretary Perry and your team to be represented here. So, to the Deputy Secretary, Dan, maybe you could summarize your testimony, and then we'll move into national security. But sure. Give a round of applause to the Department of Energy. They've really been leaning in on this as well. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the invitation to share a few thoughts with the Space Council. It's a personal honor for me to be here with such a distinguished group of individuals who are continuing to work on America's resurgence on the next great frontier. Because this is my first participation with one of your meetings, I'll keep my comments at a very high level, and I think I've provided with each of you with a summary of the Department's historical contributions to the space program. I want to be clear, Mr. Vice President, that the Department sees space as a very important and strategic focus for our department. DOE is your partner in innovation, in exploration, and in excellence. Our predecessor organization, the Atomic Energy Commission, was a key collaborator during the Apollo missions, and we are eager to join you in returning Americans to the moon, establishing a permanent base there, and then developing the technologies that are needed to send us to Mars and far beyond. Secretary Perry likes to say that given the breadth of our efforts, DOE stands for the Department of Everything. And there's a lot of truth to that. There's no question. DOE's 17 national laboratories discovered dark energy. We helped kickstart the development of the World Wide Web. We accelerated America's ongoing energy revolution, and perhaps most importantly for today's conversation, we powered the spacecraft that explore other planets. So I would argue that DOE also stands for the Department of Exploration. We're proud to have partnered with NASA and other members of the Space Council on a number of important endeavors. For almost 60 years, scientists at our national laboratories have built the RTG, the radioisotopic thermoelectric generator that was mentioned by Dr. Drogemeyer just a few minutes ago. Those have powered the deep space missions like Pioneer and Voyager, Pathfinder, Curiosity and Cassini, and New Horizons. We've provided detectors and sensors for studying Earth and space, and our user facilities engaged in a large range of space-related research, from modeling plasmas and testing materials for radiation hardness to analyzing comet and asteroid samples. Last year, we joined NASA in the ITEC Cycle 2 Forum, an event devoted to solving tough energy challenges here on Earth and in space. And we collaborated on the Krusty experiment, which is a bit of a strange acronym. It stands for Kilowatt Reactor Using Stirling Technology. But despite the funny acronym, under this project, we demonstrated heat conversion concepts that will provide the design basis for fission power systems on the surface of Mars. The effort was so successful that in May it received the Gears of Government President's Award for making a profound difference in the lives of American people. Today we're working with NASA on a number of major initiatives to enable nuclear power space exploration over the next decade, and these include powering the Mars 2020 rover and developing the Dragonfly rotorcraft, which in the 2030s will explore Saturn's moon Titan. We're also exploring other frontiers which may be of importance to the space exploration, and those are exascale computing and artificial intelligence. Our laboratories are home to many of the world's fastest supercomputers, including 4 of the top 10 and the world's fastest. And we're currently working on developing 3 exascale machines that will launch us into the next generation of computing power. AI technologies at our national laboratories are already being used for many applications, from cybersecurity to better treatments for cancer and traumatic brain injury. We look forward to applying these capabilities to the many challenges that come with deep space exploration.
And that is going to do it for us today at Fox 29's News Now. Be sure to catch us again tomorrow, same time, 10 a.m., and follow us at fox29.com, as well as our mobile app and across social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And thank you for joining us this morning.